Retrospective show hosted by myself, John Hayes, and the one man I know that would gladly do a fusion dance with Adam Sandler, Carl Jacobs.
I want to bring up the fact that we, at what point is it not a brand new weekly podcast anymore? We're like, isn't this like the fifth episode?
Yeah, you have a really good point. On that topic, kind of our sixth episode. We did record this one, and there were some technical issues, but like most of our favorite Dragon Ball Z characters, they're back to life. So,
it's a great
joining us this week, we have our very special guest, Glink. Tell us all a little bit about yourself.
Hey guys, yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. I think this podcast, this format is awesome. And I make YouTube videos about different games, different things within internet culture, you could say. A little bit of show analysis too, or I'll bring up different analogies and things from certain shows I've enjoyed watching a lot. And and I guess here we're going to discuss Dragon Ball Z, more specifically the Cell saga, which is something I have a huge admiration for and I'm pretty into.
Yeah, so as a little what would you call it, pretense. I've never watched Dragon Ball Z up until we were planning on recording this podcast. Up until preparing for recording this podcast. And so I feel like I'm the only one that's coming into this completely blind. I know Glink over there grew up with Dragon Ball Z, and then I think, Johnny's going to get into it, but he got into Dragon Ball Z a little bit later. So I think it's kind of cool how each of us have completely different grasps on it and impacts in their lives on it.
Yeah, it's Glink, you can start. What is Dragon Ball to you, basically, that when we gave you the option to pick literally anything that has been animated, Dragon Ball was what you went to? And then also
why the Cell saga?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So growing up, I think a lot of kids my age, I'm 24 right now. I was around maybe younger than 10, maybe 8 or 7 or even 6 when I first got introduced to Dragon Ball Z. And that's because a lot of people my age and around that generation grew up watching Cartoon Network a lot, cable TV. And one of the most popular blocks during that era is Toonami, which was this 2-hour block, I think, that was normally after school. So it was prime time, weekdays, and even on Saturdays. They would have all sorts of exciting shows that ran the gamut from, American cartoons sometimes to eventually Japanese anime that was localized. And one of the first ones that really, I think, became super popular and in fact paved the way was Dragon Ball Z. And I just remember I had 2 older brothers growing up and I had friends in school. It was Dragon Ball Z was this thing that I felt anyone could relate to. And it just felt so exciting to see these characters just shooting lasers out of their hands, fighting, beating each other up, and these big almost boss battles between the bad guys of the show. And that's how I kind of fell in love with it. And then as I got older, I kind of grew a deeper appreciation for more subtle things in the show that I definitely did not pick up on, because at first it's just all the action that I'm in love with. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the Soul Saga, to get back to that, to bring it full circle, is just, it's almost like the culmination of the best parts of Dragon Ball Z. It has a lot of the action, a lot of the stuff that my inner child really likes, but it also has pretty good writing and character development and themes that I think is the best of Dragon Ball altogether. Probably, yeah. And that's why I really like that saga specifically. And I think it's almost something you can enjoy even if you don't necessarily like those types of shows or super long animes. It's just a very good arc.
I agree with it. Again, just to pretense, I didn't watch Dragon Ball Z, and I also haven't watched any other saga, so I kind of started right into the what was called the Imperfect Cell saga, and then jumped into the Perfect Cell saga, and now I'm here to talk about it. So,
Yeah.
so that's all I'm aware of in terms of Dragon Ball Z. I mean, like my best friend's like dad was like obsessed with Dragon Ball Z growing up, so I would like come into their house and see him watching it, and that's like as much as I know about Dragon Ball Z. But I have to agree that I think, at least from what I can gather, it seems like it has all the action and then all the storytelling that comes along with it too. So I think that's super admirable.
Yeah, and my story with it is kind of weird because I, as a kid, was always aware of Dragon Ball and had like seen bits of it, but I was never super into it. And I think probably because I didn't watch it consistently enough to really know what was going on. Like I would catch bits and pieces of episodes and try and like figure out what had happened before to kind of understand what I'm seeing in the moment. But it wasn't really until I was old enough to like have full access to the internet basically and be able to binge it, because this show is so easy and fun to sit down and just watch a ton of back to back. And that's basically what I did. Was once I realized, oh, I have the ability to watch Dragon Ball, and I've always kind of been interested in it to a point where like I could recognize characters were from Dragon Ball just by looking at them. And I was like, as a kid, I was like, I don't know who Frieza is, but I know the name Frieza, and I'm interested in this weird reptile man who's got a bunch of superpowers. And like from there, I kind of stretched out into, I rewatched all of Dragon Ball and I watched all of Z, and I just totally fell in love with the world that they created. And I think like nailed it. The Cell Saga is, I think, really the culmination of, it does everything that everyone loves the show for, because it does have a great villain, and it's got a lot of great setups and great moments and really good fights, and it's got those bits of like the training and the evolving that the characters do like emotionally within their arcs, but also like physically you get those moments of power is talked about a lot, and like not directly power levels, but just saying like this person is powerful, like as a concept shows up a lot throughout the Cell arc, specifically because of the nature of the villain and such. But like it does all of it really well, and there's no points where I feel like I'm confused or bored or like frustrated with any of it. That certain shows, especially when it's a show that's been going on this long and that has this much history to it, have definitely gone there before, where I didn't find at any point watching the Cell arc that I was like, this is wasting my time. I was invested throughout, front to back.
Yeah, I agree. There's like zero filler in it from what I gathered. And also like, we'll get to it, but I feel like even if we can technically consider stuff filler, like there were a few episodes where I was like, I can understand like somebody considering this filler, and like maybe you can sum it up very quickly. But it also just like every single thing adds to the ongoing storylines and like every situation that's happening, to where it doesn't really feel like filler at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like other shows could have like just borderline ridiculous filler that like just kind of chops everything up. I feel like this might be like, if it does have filler, if you acknowledge that it has filler, you have to also acknowledge that that filler technically still like builds up the anticipation and like
or builds
the suspense of everything, or builds character. Yeah,
Right. Well, and this is something that John has alluded to before, and I think it's a good point to bring up, is just the pacing of the show is something that it's structured in such a way that, like, yes, there's going to be slower episodes, slower moments, but it's all with the idea that there's going to be like a payout, a payoff of, oh, you get to see this character in his full potential, or you get to see this character develop in this way, or you get to see him do something that you always wanted him to do, or you always thought he was going to do. And Dragon Ball Z does that so well, especially with the Saiyan saga, or sorry, the Cell saga, the Cell saga slash, arc, whatever you want to call it, because each character does have their kind of own role, their own personality, and yet they're all faced with this great challenge in this arc, and essentially they have to live up to their full potential or serve some sort of purpose, really, to overcome this challenge, which of course is like ultimately Cell. But even the things leading up to that all create a really, I think, interesting story arc. Do you guys want to, should we like start from the beginning, I guess, and kind of break it down?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, how about really quick? I'll just start out with a little bit, like a few facts.
Yeah.
So the Cell Saga that we're talking about is the combination of both the Imperfect Cell Saga and the Perfect Cell Saga.
And also the Cell games are in there.
The Cell games
But that's also
exist.
kind of part of the Perfect Cell Saga. I don't exactly know the definition of where
fair
it all
enough.
starts and ends.
But starting with the Imperfect Cell Saga, it was originally aired in 1992 in Japan and then in 2000 in the USA. The first thing to combine all of those sagas as one Cell Saga was actually the trading card game. And just a few more things. Cell appears in 58 different video games. And he features in 33 separate fights in Dragon Ball Z, 3 fights in Dragon Ball Super, and 1 fight in Dragon Ball GT.
We don't count GT. that is like a point of contention among some purists. I don't mind GT that much, but some purists are like, oh, GT does not count. But
we were discussing this. We were like,
yeah.
I mean, I've never seen GT. I don't think Johnny has. But
well,
do you?
That's the thing is, we were talking about this at some point before we had recorded, and Karl was like, I know that there's like GT is a series, but I don't know what it is. Do you know what it is? And I was like, the only thing I know about GT is that anytime I'm like, oh, I still have, because I've only watched the original and Z, and I'm like, once I finish my rewatch of Z that I'm on right now, I'm gonna go to Super, and I was like, and then maybe I'll like check out GT because I know that also exists and I haven't seen it. And it's the response I get from people is always, you don't have to check out GT, or don't you dare say that name to me. Like, I feel like I've offended a couple people by saying Dragon Ball GT to their face. I can't, I don't know anything about it, but that's like...
So we'll just scratch that. There were 0 fights in Dragon Ball GT.
That doesn't exist. But no, there's it's funny how you mentioned 58 games. It's like, that's another thing. I mean, just that in itself speaks to the cultural impact on some level of Dragon Ball Z as a whole. It's like, there are so many games and merchandise and things that, oh my god, like it'll just blow your... I mean, we can get to that more later, I guess. But so to set the scene, kind of like, I mean, I won't go into every single aspect of the story because, but to break down like the kind of chronology of it, the first thing about the Cell Saga that I really enjoy is just how they start off with. So they have like basically the pantheon of the cast of characters that you've grown to know throughout the series, and they're all kind of sensing this threat, this familiar threat of Frieza, and then of course out of nowhere comes this Super Saiyan who's like wearing these weird clothes with a sword, who slices Frieza and his father up and just destroys them. And then his first order of business is to tell everyone that he's from the future, that Goku, like our favorite character, is going to basically die unless he gets an antidote, and that these 2 killer androids are coming. So it sets like this, it totally, the writers basically just said, okay, everything you know about Dragon Ball Z up until this point, just completely forget it, and there's going to be some major changes here and conflicts. And that really sets the tone super well. And then, you know, of course, as the story progresses, one of the most interesting things about the Cell Saga, I think, in its creation process, I always like to say, like, there's 2 ways that making things up as you go pays out. Sometimes it forces you to be really creative, and sometimes it kind of makes it like less of a point. Like, I would argue the Boo Saga, messier. I would argue the Boo Saga kind of lended itself more to being kind of more messy, less focused. I mean, it's still enjoyable in many ways, but not as much as the Cell Saga. And so in the creation of the Cell Saga, which in my opinion just was super creative, initially Akira Toriyama, you know, the main guy behind Dragon Ball.
He's watching the stream. He's listening to this right now. So
he's listening to this right now.
Thanks for hanging.
Thank you.
Thanks for...
Appreciate it.
We know that he checks out every single podcast that will mention Dragon Ball Z.
Please retweet us.
All 558 of them. But almost as many as the games.
Yeah, almost as many games as Cell has been in,
I don't even think Akira Toriyama knows how many, like, has any idea of how far the games have gone. And, like,
I like to imagine that he doesn't.
Anyways, so what's interesting though is that he had his main editors and writers and stuff that helped him, and I think he was the main writer, but he had these editors, and initially it was just going to be Trunks coming from the future warning about these 2 androids, which were going to be Android 19 and Dr. Gero, Android 20. And then his editor was like, you know, these 2 androids, they look kind of like goofballs. One of them's like a fat clown, one of them's an old geezer. They're not threatening enough. Okay, we need like better.
You just
threats.
had Frieza. You can't go from Frieza to that. Like,
Exactly. Like you just had the supreme galactic overlord, whatever, of the galaxy in this epic fight. You can't downgrade to this two like clown looking androids. All right. So then in the story, and you obviously don't, or you're not privy to this when you're watching it, but the way it plays out is super interesting. In the story, it's like, okay, so Dr. Gero, Android 19 is destroyed, and then Dr. Gero runs to his lab, and then it's revealed that there are two other androids. And those are the actual ones. And Trunks is like, yeah, those are the ones for my future. Okay. So that's 17 and 18, of course, and then 16 follows suit. And then, the editors are like, it was all right, but they're still not scary enough. Okay. And then Akira Toriyama is like, all right, he brings out Cell, who's like this horrifying, like from Alien or something, Alien vs. Predator creature who's just... I mean, well, Karl, describe to me like your first impression of Imperfect Cell.
So seeing... This is the only villain that I really have any... Like, I got to watch his backstory as anybody was introduced to him, and it really, like, we were talking about this, it really does feel like a horror movie whenever they're introducing him, and they do it in such, like, a slow, like, menacing way, where the first time he's on the screen, it's after, like, 10 minutes of you...
Hearing people die.
Yeah, 10 minutes of you hearing people die and like just understanding that at any second you're going to see him on the screen. And then it finally, if you don't know what Imperfect Cell looks like for some reason, just look up Imperfect Cell as I'm explaining this. It finally, the camera pans, starting at just the gravel on the street and just panning upward, and you just see like his gross like hand feet that he has like just gripping the sidewalk, and it like just goes up to this scorpion alien green bug thing that's just like holding this man, and it's just so, it really is like a horror movie. And the way he like, just the way he like sucks people up and stuff is just like, oh my gosh,
it's pretty unusual too for even Dragon Ball Z. Like, you normally people just blast each other and they explode or something, but like with Cell, it was like, no, it's personal. It's really like a serial killer.
It felt like, and I think obviously we're gonna get to how much more powerful Perfect Cell is, and how much more powerful even a semi-perfect Cell is, but like something about Imperfect Cell where he's just so like inhumane with how he just takes people down. Yeah. Because he literally pulls like this scorpion tail, stabs people with it, and sucks them until they literally are inexistent. Like there's a frame where the people disappear, not even just that their bones are still there.
That's one of the setups that they have, is it's like they're all sitting in the house and they hear a newscast about, because it's they find the like pod of like the
of Cell's like original form
from his like larval form or whatever, and it's already pretty gross, and you're like, oh, I wonder what this monster is going to be. And then you find out that it gets bigger through these newscasts of people saying that this huge city that had, what was it, like 10,000 people in it?
15,000 is what it said.
15,000 people. And then it just has shots of the city, and it's just closed. It literally looks like they were like raptured. Like they're just totally gone. And then it's like shots of buildings with like gunfire in the background. And it's just the reporter being like, oh my God, what's happening? Like it's all set up so... They just force you to think about it.
Yeah. And it also like, it's something about like turning somebody from like, for instance, there's a scene where he just is crossing a street and just is standing in a street monologuing, and then a bus filled with like football players pulls up and they're like beeping at him, telling him to get out of the street while this dude's just monologuing, and he like turns this people's day. I don't know if they just finished their football game, if they're about to go to one, but like they had a pretty innocent, okay day, and it turned it into them like not even existing in a physical form. Like their bones aren't there anymore. You know what I mean? And there's something so wildly like, I know I keep saying inhumane, but I don't even know, I can't even think of another word for it. Like it just...
No, that's a good way to describe it. And that's, I think, so to go back slightly to what I was saying before, it's like, that's where the creativity came in of having to create something bigger and badder. And the kind of genius of Cell as a character is that the whole basis for him existing is basically he is this genetic organism made up of DNA from all of the major fighters of the show, from Frieza, from Vegeta, from Goku, Piccolo, and he exhibits all of their traits in one way or another. And even the people he's sucking up, that's how he's getting more powerful. So he's almost the culmination of just life force of the strongest life of just average people in the show and citizens in the cities, and he basically turns that into his own power, into his own, cruel, like, perfection in the end, what we see with Perfect Cell. And so
also, I was just going to say, there's something like so interesting and like intriguing of watching, like, he really has such a dynamic, he's such a dynamic character in which he starts out so barbaric, and then like once he gets power and keeps gaining power, I'm not trying to get too ahead of ourselves, but like he ends up becoming like such like a supreme ruler figure, like actually perfect in all ways, switching from like a barbaric, like brutal killing machine into that is like it's a wild transformation, but they do like, it so properly too.
If the xenomorph from Alien suddenly turned into Hannibal Lecter, like
but still looked like
but still could eat you, like
it's like xenomorph like, now with a bow tie.
Right, and I think that's kind of the theme of the whole arc, really, is they encapsulate that so well of character development. And with Cell, you see it physically too, which is also brilliant. Like, you see him morph from, his imperfect form to this more like kind of in between, like hulking figure with his semi-perfect form. And then, of course, his perfect form is like he's like this refined, sort of cool looking, almost like human-like. Like a space humanoid kind of like kind of guy. And so now the next element I think that's really interesting about this arc that I want to focus on is like sort of like duality or like companionship we see between Trunks and Vegeta, who's his father, and then also between Goku and Gohan, who's another father-son relationship, obviously. And when I think the way this plays out is just it's done so well. So Trunks and Vegeta initially go into the hyperbolic. I mean, we're skipping several like details here, but the main points to focus on, because we'll be here all day for explaining the entire plot. But assuming most people are familiar with the arc, is that Trunks and Vegeta, they go into the hyperbolic time chamber. They're training, and all throughout this time, ever since Trunks showed up, Vegeta never really owned him as his son. He never really like embraced him. We don't see like that much love from Vegeta, which
I don't even think he says the term son. I think he always refers to him as like
boy or
that
something.
One or the boy or something like that. Like
like or even more disassociative, like that. Like, oh, there's another Super Saiyan here. Like,
exactly.
And I didn't even, just because I didn't know anything about Dragon Ball Z, but I knew who Trunks was. Like, I would be able to pick him out of a group of people, and same with Vegeta. And I had zero clue that Vegeta was Trunks' dad, and it threw me off so hard because, like, I don't know, it was like wild to me. So it was so cool to like see this dynamic so organically and so like I really was getting to know it alongside them.
Right, and it's so interesting how we know Vegeta as this prideful sort of anti-hero like character all throughout the series, and then for the first time we're like, is he gonna be showing some love here, showing some affection maybe for once?
But don't worry.
And oh yeah, like don't worry, it's pretty far in between. I mean, it's just so interesting. It really plays to his character because it shows how arrogant he is, how prideful he is. And then Trunks, on the other hand, from his future, in his future, all these people are dead. Goku is dead. Vegeta's dead. He never got to know his father. And it's like, in his head, he's like...
He didn't... So, just to confirm this, in his future, he didn't ever know them, didn't he?
No.
Like, he didn't know who they were.
He only knew Gohan and knew of... I mean, as like a baby, I guess he sort of knew them, but...
Yeah. But he never got to know them even, so that's kind of a cool dynamic to it. So he kind of... Like, because whenever I hear that, I kind of have them pictured as, like, legends that he's never actually like reached, you know what I mean? So that's like another cool dynamic about it. But sorry, you continue.
Yeah, so no, thanks for bringing that up, because that's another really cool thing, is that you get to sort of see through Trunks' perspective that he idolized all these people, these Z fighters, because in his future it's all wiped out because of the androids, and he sort of idolizes them, and you get to see for the first time him meeting them and him kind of being like shy and nervous to meet them, to meet Goku. And he's going back to the past to give the antidote to Goku so he can ultimately defeat Cell. That's the whole plan. That's what it's building up to. I mean, to defeat the androids, but later on Cell, as they realize he's the threat too. And then with the another great thing they do with Trunks, just while we're on him, I grew to appreciate this later as I got older, but you see, like, so when the first time really Vegeta and Trunks encounter Cell is when he's in his semi-perfect form, and they just came out of the hyperbolic time chamber training together for a year, and they're pretty strong now. They're much stronger than Cell is in that form, and all Cell needs to do is absorb Android 18 in order to get to his perfect form. And we see how Vegeta is able to just manhandle Cell, able to completely destroy him, but his own sane pride, his own arrogance gets the best of him. And this is how the writing is done brilliantly. The weaknesses of the characters come back to haunt them. So because of that, he lets... And Cell, who knows this literally because he has Vegeta's DNA in him. He has the same drive to get stronger, to have a better fight. That hubris. He knows that Vegeta will be enticed by allowing Cell to get stronger, to reach his perfect form so that he could have a good fight. And we see Trunks trying to prevent this. And even to the point where after Vegeta, we could go back on this a little bit later, the whole Vegeta versus Cell dynamic here. Yeah. But after basically Cell gets perfect, Trunks steps in and he's like, he thinks he's very powerful and very strong. And he is. He does have a lot of power. But a lot of the power is this bulked up sort of muscle he has. It's sort of like a not ideal version of Super Saiyan 2. It's like Super Saiyan 2 without the speed. And so he's kind of powerful, but also still he can't beat Cell. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have the stamina to keep it up. And in this confrontation, Cell reveals to Trunks in a very like poetic justice kind of way that the only reason I'm here, the only reason I was able to get to this timeline is because of the time machine that you had in your timeline. Because the Cell of the current timeline was destroyed because they found out about him, the little minuscule like single cell organism that he was. But in Trunks' timeline in the future, he grew to be Imperfect Cell. Took the time, killed Trunks, took the time machine, and then went back. And it's like, holy shit, this entire set of events, this big, astronomical threat of Cell only happened because Trunks tried so hard to fix the past, to change the course of history. And it says the lesson is like, with that comes these unexpected, complete changes and the things that you don't even realize. So I think that is just brilliant.
Mm-hmm. That is. Do you have anything?
Yeah, they do so much with Vegeta and Cell and Trunks, like that trio of having them figure out more or less who they are as people. Like you get a lot of development between Trunks and Vegeta, especially in that relationship. We were talking about earlier how he totally doesn't acknowledge him as his son, and you get that brief. The first time he ever does call him son is in the fight against Cell, where he has, after he's already shown Cell that he can absolutely destroy him, he, during his monologue, says, "Of course I could easily kill you, but if by some fluke miracle you're able to defeat me, there's no way you'll make it out alive because my son is right there and he's just as strong as I am." And you get that little moment of, even though it's not Vegeta being like a good father and telling his son he loves him, you see a little bit of pride in him and at least acknowledgement that, yes, I am your father, which is way more than we got before. And just that little bit of like a smirk that he kind of gives as he says that, I think shows a lot more growth than I definitely would have expected rewatching this.
It's subtle, but it is growth.
Trunks' daddy issues were solved for just a few seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That very moment, he was like, oh,
I do exist.
Yeah, and
so this is what it's like.
You see that how much Trunks goes through with he still has so much respect and adoration for his father, to the point where when Vegeta does end up letting Cell turn into Perfect Cell just because he wants to have that better fight, that Trunks doesn't stop him, because he had, and I think it's Krillin that he's talking to at the point where Krillin's like, "Why aren't you doing something to stop this? Like, you're powerful enough too." And Trunks is like, "I don't want to like destroy my father's sense of self-worth over this. Like, we need to." He's like,
I'd rather the universe explode.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's to the point where even after he is Perfect Cell, he's like, "I can't Hulk out and do my whole thing until Vegeta is unconscious, because I don't want him to have to deal with the fact that his son might be able to overtake him. That would like ruin his pride and self-worth." Which, even though Vegeta probably deserves to have that shown to him and have like kind of the sense knocked into him for why on earth would you let Perfect Cell become Perfect Cell? Like, Trunks has that much understanding and patience for him, which is a super good duality against at about the same time Goku and Gohan, while they're training in the hyperbolic time chamber, there's a moment when Gohan is like, you're taking it way too easy on me, why aren't you going all out? Like, I can't believe you're not willing to make me look like... He's yelling about being way too easy as Vegeta's being way too hard. And it's a really good, like, dynamic that they kind of have that balance of showing where, like, sometimes Gohan might need Goku to be a little more Vegeta, and pretty much all the time Trunks needs Vegeta to be a little more Goku.
Just constantly.
Yeah. Just at least call me son once. Like...
Right, and that's like, I'm so glad you mentioned that parallel, because again, like, the strengths of each character are so highlighted and the weaknesses are so highlighted too. So Goku and Gohan are the complete opposite of Vegeta and Trunks. They're not serious. They're not super, like, I mean, of course they can be serious, but generally they have this calm demeanor. They're very carefree almost and kind of jokey. And then you're like, but they're even stronger in many ways. They have more potential in many ways than Vegeta and Trunks do. But they just don't have that same drive, that anger driving them. Exactly. And the whole arc, it's kind of misdirection, because throughout the whole series, really, we're led to believe, and the whole purpose Trunks even came to the past, was to give Goku the antidote so he could save everyone. So he could be Superman, so he could save the world, as always.
I'd like to point out, like, not even metaphorically, like, there's literally a good large chunk of this whole saga. Goku's literally, like, just asleep, and everybody is protecting him 100% just for the fact that he can come back and then save the day. Like, not even just in a metaphorical sense. Like, physically, they're literally just holding out, hoping that, like, when Goku comes back, it's time to start kicking butt.
There's definitely points where they have Piccolo say, like, once Goku's up, we're safe, but we just can't do anything until Goku's up. Like,
But sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's a really good point. It's like, you literally, it's self-aware. Like, even the characters know, okay, Goku's our only chance. They don't make any qualms about it. They're not like, oh, Krillin's gonna save the day. Like, nobody...
Mr. Popo.
Exactly. But the series, the writing in this arc does a really brilliant way of subverting expectations, in that you expect Goku to be the one to fight Cell, and then when it comes down to the actual fight, you see that that Goku has basically been prepping Gohan this whole time to unlock his potential that lies within him, this latent ability that we've seen sparks of throughout the series. In the Saiyan saga, when he's fighting Raditz, Gohan bursts out of the capsule as like a toddler and basically overpowers him. Things like that you see throughout the series, and there's this hinting that there's more to Gohan than meets the eye. And the payoff for that in the Cell saga is just like the culmination of everything, of this character development throughout the series, and this subverting of our expectations as viewers, that it's not always Goku that saves the day. It's not always on his shoulders. And sometimes things turn out differently. In the same way that Trunks had no idea that the Cell threat even existed, and everybody expected Goku to save them, sometimes it turns out that Goku is not the one to save them all.
And even Trunks didn't know that, who is from the future to like, in theory, have the key to saving everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then to go back, like, I think it's also really well done how we even get to that final fight in the first place, which is, we see in the same vein that Vegeta, his hubris gets the best of him, which makes Cell perfect. We see that literally within Cell, that Saiyan DNA, that hubris of it, that pride of, well, I want to challenge, I want to fight. I don't want to I could just destroy this world right now, but there'd be no fun in that. And he's right. Like, that makes sense in a certain, like, arrogant perspective. And he calls
totally
for the Cell games.
Yeah, he totally plays on Vegeta with that. We're literally in the fight before, when it is semi-perfect Cell fighting Vegeta. Vegeta at the start takes it easy and makes semi-perfect Cell think that he's gonna win. Before then, he releases one attack on him, and then Vegeta's like, alright, I'm done, and then just sloshes him. Like, no contest. Until Perfect Cell has that turning point moment where he figures out Vegeta's hubris, and then once he is Perfect Cell, he does the exact same thing to Vegeta, where the first bit of the fight, he totally takes it easy and makes Vegeta think that he's gonna win. And, like, basically totally play into his ego that, yeah, you are the perfect Super Saiyan and there's nothing that could ever stop you.
It's like
and
a battle
Vegeta...
of who's more of a sociopath. It really is.
That's literally what it is, though. Yeah.
Because that kick that Vegeta delivers when he just goes for the kick to the neck and then Cell doesn't even flinch is very much...
So we should discuss that, like, in more detail, because, like, Vegeta's ready to go. He's, like, has Perfect Cell, like, just, you know, in his sights, and then he gives this, like, all-powerful final blow style kick straight to the cheek. And, like, I remember Cell shifts a little bit to the left, not even in, like, a pained way, but more in, like, a this dude's, like, touching me kind of, like, annoyed way. And like when Vegeta realizes when Vegeta realizes that, like, he put all of his power into that kick, it was such, like, a...
Well, even after that with the blast too, like, the kick was like, he was like, holy shit, like, okay, I'm not putting a dent in this guy. And then Cell is, like, basically just giving him an opportunity, right, to, like, see what he's got.
Yeah.
And then and then you see the blast, this big build, it's like shoots off into space, right, just, like, goes off in the atmosphere. And then you see Cell, like, oh my god, he actually looks damaged. He actually looks like he might be in some trouble here. And, like, even Cell looks distressed. And then the second he regenerates, like, half his body or whatever that is, he has this, like, totally in control, cool look on his face, like he was playing Vegeta the whole time. And at that moment, you realize, like, oh my god, Vegeta is so outclassed here. And there's no, like, competition. It's not even close at all.
Like, it's almost like just holding your arm out, making sure a kid doesn't try to swing at you.
Right.
Like, there was literally just, it's unreachable.
And that, of course, sets the stage for, like, the Cell games, which, as John was saying, it's basically the complete opposite level of arrogance. It's like, now the arrogance is on Cell. He thinks he's so much stronger, and he kind of is. That he's like, well, I'm just going to make a fun game out of this. You guys have 7 days. Prepare yourselves. I want to fight Goku. I want to fight all of you. And then that sets the stage for, like, the most crazy fight of all time, basically. So should we go there, or?
I was just going to quickly touch on before that. You definitely see those moments from Cell where he does have that ultimate power earlier, and they do such a good job of making him horrifying just by how strong he is. Like, even to the point of when he's still Imperfect Cell fighting Piccolo, where they make a point beforehand to say that Piccolo, who we already know is pretty powerful, has just become even more powerful by merging with Kame. And then he goes down to fight him, and then maybe the most violent point in this, not the most, but one of the most violent points in this entire arc is after he's defeated Piccolo, and he's just holding him by the shoulder and just blasts some sort of energy bolt through his chest and tosses him over his shoulder like it's nothing. And they just do such a good job of making Cell seem like he's not only so powerful that he can do all of this, but that he just doesn't fear literally anything that they can do. He's so sure of himself and his ability to power that...
Yeah, I feel like it's, like, rightfully so that he doesn't fear anybody else, because he really is just that much more powerful.
And he knows that he has more potential locked inside of him too, as like, in the Perfect Cell form, of course. He realizes that he could get even stronger too with the Saiyan DNA, with the regeneration. Like, it's he's constantly feels like he's one step ahead of them. And then, John, when we talked before, you mentioned something that I think is a good point too. When Piccolo, like, when we think Piccolo's dead, like, he's pretty much on the verge of death completely, on death's door, after Cell, like, basically annihilates him. There's a moment there where it goes to Gohan and Goku, and Gohan's like, we have to do something, you know, Piccolo, who's basically like the second father figure to Gohan, they feel his life force fading, and then Goku's like, no, like, we have to wait, like, we're not strong enough yet. And that kind of plays into the whole, you know that these characters have this humongous challenge. You know that there's going to be this build-up. But, you know, even then it's like, even the characters realize in the show are self-aware of the pacing of, we can't just jump into this yet. We can't, there's going to be, the patience will pay off, in other words. We have to be smart about this. We have to be calculated, kind of.
And it really does. That, like, it's like, just to go back to touch on what we were talking about earlier, like, the points when they're not fighting Cell, or the points when, even when we're trying to figure out what Cell even is, the there's like full episodes where we just don't see any action, but every single episode is building towards those action scenes where you just know that they're about to go up against something that they really shouldn't stand a chance against, and in a lot of fights they just don't stand up against. But like you're just so ready for it because each episode builds it so perfectly to get you to the next step of excitement.
And then, so I guess to continue and kind of like, I mean, there's a few more things to hit for sure, but so it all culminates in, of course, like in these Cell games, which is at first we're led to believe that still up until this point that Goku is going to be the one to defeat Cell. We see that Gohan turn Super Saiyan, but we kind of just view it as like he's the sparring partner for Goku ultimately.
Yeah.
And we see Goku fighting Cell, and at first it's like it's a pretty good fight. I mean, it looks like, yeah, this is going to go in really intensely. This is going to go on super long. And then like almost out of nowhere, Goku basically just clearly when he has more energy left, he basically just throws in the towel. And he's like, okay, I'm done. I'm tired. And you're like, what? Like even the characters all go, what? Like, what are you talking about? We're completely screwed without you. And even Gohan for a second is like pretty much thinking that. I mean, he knows that he has some potential within him, but he's not at all ready or confident to like just have that on demand necessarily or know how to use it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so Goku, who's kind of like this, you view him as this like naive character, is kind of genius in this moment because he knows what no one else knows, including Gohan, that he has this massive potential, that he knows how powerful he can be. And that, of course, leads to Gohan fighting Cell. And then at this point, I should mention Android 16, because him and Gohan have this really amazing chemistry here, and they complement each other super well. So Gohan is, throughout the whole series, again, he's like this very gentle, calm, sort of caring, compassionate kid, basically. And Android 16, even though him and the other androids and Cell technically were all made and programmed essentially to kill Goku as their main objective, Android 16, you see him grow a soft spot for life, for nature, I mean, he's constantly like in nature, appreciating life in many ways. And then after Bulma and Capsule Corp basically reprogram him, he's even more so, does not have that hatred anymore, and that desire for killing anymore for Goku.
Yeah.
And you see him at some point in the Gohan Cell fight, where Gohan's initially kind of taking the beating and you know, losing basically. You see Android 16 come in with this move to do a self-sacrifice, to explode himself so that he can destroy Cell and ultimately, you know, end it. And of course, he doesn't realize that the nuke was taken out of his core, basically for safety reasons, when he was worked on in Capsule Corp. And then Cell basically destroys him, everything except for his head. Okay. Now let me introduce quickly Mr. Satan, who it plays like the most incidental, insignificant, yet somehow most key role in a weird way in this whole debacle.
The most powerful character.
Yes, secretly. So Mr. Satan, aka Hercule, and like one of the Funimation dub, I forget which dub it is exactly, but one of the dubs he's called Hercule, one of the dubs he's called Mr. Satan. Anyways, so he's basically viewed as the champion of the world by most ordinary citizens of the world, who the cool thing about Dragon Ball Z is the main cast of characters are not like superheroes. They're not viewed as that. They're not in the public eye at all. And most of the fights don't even take place on Earth, I guess. So that kind of makes sense too. But either way, Mr. Satan is viewed as like this champion of the people. If he can't defeat Cell, no one can. And of course, he has no explanation for all these crazy things going on as he's on the scene with reporters of like laser beams coming out of hands and like just crazy fast movement. He has no explanation for it because he's not powerful at all. When faced with Cell, he just gets knocked into the wall and somehow doesn't die, but anyways, just completely out of the fight. Now, the reason he's actually so significant is because everyone watching knows, the whole cast of characters knows Mr. Satan is this weakling who glorifies himself, thinks he's the strongest, thinks he's going to save the day. And he's not. And he's just like this horribly weak guy. But the trigger that causes Gohan to unlock his full potential, to be so powerful, to become overcome with emotion to the point where he reaches a new form of Super Saiyan 2, is caused when Mr. Satan throws Android 16's head to Gohan's feet, to the point where Android 16, who's barely kind of alive at this point still, just his head, gives Gohan like this final motivational words of wisdom, of advice, telling him to let it go, to basically find his inner potential here. And as he's saying that, he's crushed to death by Cell. You see blood gushing out. It's like this big, scene-based, dramatic crushing of his skull. And in that moment, we see everything. The editing, the cinematography, it's all, the music is just comes together. You see like the black background being shattered by this red sort of jagged line. You see this like gold Super Saiyan bird thing flying. We're not even really sure what that is. This like Japanese choir singing. It's like immaculate choir. And we see Gohan just like something unlocks within him in that moment, in that emotional state, to where he's now Super Saiyan 2. He's now unlocked his full potential in many ways. And so, in a way, and obviously he goes on to defeat Cell. And, I mean, there's more details. We'll get into that in a minute, maybe. But in a weird way, Mr. Satan does play, like, a very key role in it all,
He's
in a funny way.
He's the reason that the universe isn't over.
Basically,
and that we're able to watch this now. Because this happened all the way back in 1992 in Japan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he
I
basically
didn't start watching it until 2019.
Mr. Satan now known as The Rock, funny enough.
He's like based on American wrestling.
Oh, for sure.
That's so funny.
WWE or whatever.
I want to bring like attention to how much of a dynamic character Android 16 is, because I remember the first scene that you really meet him in this saga. Android 17 and 18 are talking, and then I forget which one, but one of them like says something to him, and he just doesn't answer, and he's just looking straight forward with his like arms crossed, and then the other one says like, hey, like, he's not going to talk to you. The only thing he wants to talk about is killing Goku. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, like, this is happening. You know what I mean? I was like, it kind of got me hyped. I was like, this is like an absolute brute death machine, doesn't want anything else, doesn't even want, like, cutting to the chase, let's just do it. And he goes all the way from that to, like, being the catalyst for why this kid becomes Super Saiyan 2 because of his passion for humans and nature. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's just, I don't know. I wanted to point that out because I think he really is super dynamic. I think a lot of characters in this arc are super dynamic, and that's why it's so special.
Yeah, they get really good touches at everyone. Even if it's a character that doesn't do much, you feel like technically Piccolo doesn't do too much for the majority of this arc, but you see that like he kind of steps into that leader role once Goku isn't there to be able to, kind of the same way that he like fathers Gohan when Goku isn't able to. He just very much takes up that role. Or like you see Krillin like try to figure, like you see him gain his confidence and then like express his love to 18 at some point. And like you see all of them move a little bit forward. No one, except for maybe like Yamcha, stays exactly where they were at the start of it.
Right.
But like,
even Yamcha adds some comedic relief with
for sure,
Master Roshi on the sidelines there.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is even the characters that don't grow a lot, they're all
there.
Like, yeah, exactly. And I'm not upset that they're there. Like, whenever it cuts back to Yamcha and Roshi just kind of like chilling on Goku's couch, I'm not upset that I'm watching Yamcha and Roshi talk about whatever's on TV. But like, but that's even like talking it down, because they do have points where they use them as like good natural ways to explain what's going on in the show, or like give a different angle or viewpoint on the events that are happening.
Hey, even Tien gets his moment in the sun.
Oh, Tien is like really good in this one too. I loved the little moment of Tien just being like, all right, I'm going to step up and fight Cell. I'm probably going to die, but I'm just going to try and buy us some time. And it was such a cool moment of the is it Tri-Blast or Tri-Beam?
I think it's the Tri-Beam. I guess it depends on the
I think
interpretation, but yeah.
Yeah, but point is, when he's just assaulting, it's imperfect still at that point, correct?
Semi-perfect, yeah.
Semi-perfect. Yeah, it's semi-perfect Cell that he's just harassing into the ground with the Tri-Beams. And it was so cool to just watch Tien like step up off the bench and go in on him. And it's such a good like even though you know he's not gonna win, you still have that moment of like, shit, he's like really good. Like he could I can't. You for a second want to believe that he's going to do it. You just know that.
Yeah.
And
There's
it's
no
super
way
cool
he
to
has
make
that.
like, it's super cool to have a character like him that you know is like grossly underpowered compared to a few of the other characters, while still being so ridiculously powerful
In that moment,
and being
yeah.
able to express that through this. Like, even though he wasn't going to win that fight, but like you see that and you're like, oh, this dude has power behind him, at least, you know.
Yeah.
Just something.
And then so quickly on the Piccolo thing, I was going to say another cool thing is when Gohan is actually getting basically his ass kicked by Cell in that fight initially, before he turned Super Saiyan 2, you kind of see like this back and forth between Goku and Piccolo. And it's kind of like they're both, Piccolo is clearly concerned almost as a father would be of his son, more so than the other characters. He's really, I mean, the other characters pitch in a little bit too, but you can tell that Piccolo is the most concerned for Gohan's like basically well-being. And he's really like kind of angry at Goku even in that moment. So like to round off the main plot of the story, if I may, we see Gohan turns Super Saiyan 2, and then at this point you see the Cell Juniors that were spawned by Cell. He just destroys them, just walks through them, just completely demolishes them. And I should mention, by the way, briefly, like I'm not trying to necessarily summarize the entire plot of the show, of this arc even, because that would take a long time, but just
we'd need more
referential
than
points.
An hour and a bit to do that.
Yeah, these are just like referential points that I want to dissect more, kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
And so yeah, you see him destroy the Cell Juniors, and then you basically see, the amazing thing is you see once again that recurring theme of arrogance, of pride, of sane pride, whatever you want to call it, emerging in Gohan, to where he knows he's stronger than Cell. He knows he can destroy Cell, but he kind of wants to toy with him. He kind of wants to really show off his strength, show off his skill, because at this point he can do whatever he wants to Cell. And you see him do that, and you see him punch Cell so hard that he spits out Android 18, which is good for Krillin, I guess. But
That's out.
yeah, I guess that worked out. And then at this point, Cell is just so fed up that he basically tries to obviously self-destruct, take the whole planet with him. And then Gohan is like, shit. Like he literally drops on his knees crying, and he's realizing that he messed up. He fell into the same trap that Vegeta fell into, that to some extent, Cell himself fell into, this sane pride. And then Goku, bringing it full circle, comes back, instant transmission ready. Like you see these glowing like stars of energy flowing by, and as teary-eyed Gohan is staring at his father, about to self-sacrifice, warp Cell off the planet and just save everyone in the end, in like a double subverting of expectations. And then as a triple subverting of expectations, turns out Goku does teleport him to King Kai's planet, which explodes. But part of Cell remained. He regenerated and he got stronger thanks to Saiyan DNA. Comes back. First thing he does is kill Trunks, which I think was done very on purpose. It was Trunks because Trunks is the one that kind of brought him into this whole world. Yeah. And he's the one we started with this arc. And we see Trunks, this character we kind of grew to like, get just instantly killed by Cell's laser blast. And then we see in Vegeta this fiery rage spiral up that we have not seen before. That shows that the whole time he really did care about Trunks more than just a random person would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we see, Vegeta go at Cell, and it's kind of futile. He gets hurt himself. And as Cell's about to almost kill Vegeta, Gohan runs in and basically blocks it with his arm, which is now bloody and disabled completely. And so we have now Super Saiyan 2 Gohan with one arm versus Perfect Cell. It culminates in this Kamehameha beam struggle, of course, right? This super epic, just final flashes of energy. You have Gohan being directed by like the spirit of Goku basically trying to help him out. So it's this big team effort. But the one thing that comes full circle, the one thing that tips the scales in Gohan's favor is Vegeta's just vengeance for Trunks' death, is his fatherly, I guess, compassion, his desire to get back at Cell for killing Trunks. He fires a final flash, we see, at the last second against Cell, who at the time, he's not even hurt by it, but he's like, what was that? Like he turns and he's like, holy shit, like it weakens him for a second, makes him vulnerable. And in that moment, just bam, Gohan unleashes all of his strength, is able to overpower Cell. And that's basically the end of the arc. I mean, for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how things really, and of course they wish back Trunks with the Dragon Balls, and they, Krillin gets with 18 and all that. But it's just, I love how they do that. They close it that way. Just turn this epic fight, this epic self-sacrifice filled with character development, filled with, feelings of love, of like pride, the downfalls of pride. It's just all brilliantly displayed, I think, in that ending sort of fight.
Yeah, I think it's like the whole arc is like 5 full circle realization stories that make a full circle that goes completely all the way like overarching around it. And I think they do a really good job at connecting every one of the big story arcs that are happening within the arc and tie it off nicely. Which like when you told me that they didn't already have a plan for the arc while they were going through it, I really couldn't. It was kind of wild to me because it felt so like well orchestrated and like felt like it was all like a part of their plan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it ties everything up so well near the end that I definitely did not believe initially that anyone could have randomly
We're calling
come
you
up
a liar.
with that.
Yeah. Well, John, we were talking earlier about in the technical difficulties episode variant of this, how and I think you made a really good point, how it's like another cool thing about Cell is not only do you see him personified in his own personality of having everyone's traits and stuff, but also in his moves. And like even in that ending fight, he's using a Kamehameha.
That's so cool. So it is a huge thing that I love about Dragon Ball that we were discussing before was that it is the characters all have their own very specific way of moving and fighting, whether that be specific moves that you attribute to. You see the discs, you think Krillin. You see the like rapid fire blasts, you think Vegeta. You see the like energy ball things that Piccolo uses. They all have their own thing that you can like actively recognize as theirs, and they use it for some like scary elements early on with Cell, where you realize that because he has everyone else's DNA, he basically has everyone else's movesets. So you see, I think the first time it's like really shown is it the Kamehameha or the Flash that happens first?
I think it might even be Piccolo's it's a special
the regeneration.
Or the regeneration too. Yeah, I mean there's a lot.
There's a lot of stuff that Cell does where he basically uses what everyone else has in his
their signature moves essentially. Yeah.
And it's a really cool element that I remember the first time specifically when I was rewatching this, because I knew Cell as a figure. Like I knew if someone showed me like a list of Dragon Ball villains, I could pin the names to most of them, and Cell was definitely one of the big ones that I knew. But having to like really learn what he's all about, that makes him so much scarier, that he can do literally anything he wants at any moment. And the fact that he will just like randomly pull, there's a point when he needs to escape and he just uses Tien's flash move when you had no idea that that's something that he can do to like suddenly blind everyone, is such a good moment of really shocking realization into all of the main characters, that it's not like they can just learn his moves and get around that. They really just have to be overall stronger, because anything they can do, he could turn around and use it against them.
Right. And
it's an ominous feeling.
It is, yeah. It's like it ties back to that feeling of this guy is always one step ahead of everyone. Exactly. And that's really what it is. And he's designed for that as a character, like both literally in the plot of the story, but also just how he plays out. And what I love about the dynamic of Cell between him versus everyone else is that he takes, as we said with Vegeta, to some extent with Gohan, he takes the weakest parts of every character and amplifies that and makes them have to face that, makes them have to grow as a character. Vegeta had to give up his pride in a certain way of being this lone warrior kind of guy and show his love for Trunks, show his, desire to defend and help, which normally he's not willing to do. He never works with other people. He never cooperates. He never interferes in a fight. But we see him break that and grow. We see Gohan tap into his potential and grow. And we even see Goku do self-sacrifice. And it's like every character has to overcome themselves in a way. Both literally, because Cell has a part of them in him, but also mentally and like at a more metaphorical level, they have to do that, which I think is just so awesome.
Yeah.
Such a cool concept for a villain. It's like if they took Venom from Spider-Man, but it's Venom of like 13 different people that all have to deal with the same, like, oh, that's me, but also just a better version that I need to like accept everything wrong with me and figure out how to exploit that in someone else while also correcting it in myself. And it just forces so much. He's such an interesting villain to think about on top of actually see.
This is making me
really good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, this is making me want to like make a video about. I'm sure it's been done to death actually, about like analyzing, because I love just like going deep into a story that's good, that has a lot of layers to it, and then just dissecting it and figuring out like what you could learn from it, or what you could
totally.
And to speak
on you can take out of it.
Yeah, because on the surface it totally is just, you know, strong man shoot beam at other strong men, and you're like, hell yeah, he's strong man.
Muscular man.
Yeah.
Spaceman.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Popo.
Oh yeah. Oh god. He's the ultimate. He's actually the ultimate power latent ability that nobody knows.
But it's like, that's what it is on the surface, but there's just so much more that you can keep. You could just take it away as like those surface level, like, oh yeah, I see he has their powers, they have to learn to overcome their powers. But the more we've been talking about it, the more I think we've all kind of been realizing that like we keep pulling back more and more on it and finding really how well structured all of this is, that they put all of these little details in there and they didn't bash you over the head with.
And none of it's like a reach or anything.
No,
it's just like there's so much to unpeel, and like the writing's actually really great with how they orchestrate it. Like, they don't, Vegeta never says that, no, I don't think of you like a son, and Trunks never says,
man, I wish you were a better dad.
Man, I wish I had a father figure. But like, in the way, what is that chamber that they go inside?
Hyperbolic time chamber.
So they go into a hyperbolic time chamber, and like Vegeta looks to Trunks and says that he's gonna train in this alone, like knowing that it's gonna be like a long time
for a year. Yeah.
But he's just
in a void of nothingness for a year. He'd rather train alone. Like, that just speaks volumes to how stubborn he is. And you're like, oh, there's no changing this guy's mind. And they don't even do it in like this weird, unrealistic way. It's like super subtle. But like, yes, Vegeta does kind of come back to defend Trunks in the end. And he's like, no, you can't do that to my son. And So should we speak a bit about the sort of cultural impact, I guess, or like the
100%.
I don't think we can.
I also do want to, before, like, just to touch on the actual what is it, the material at hand, before we start talking about that, I wanted to address, first of all, the music in this, which we haven't yet, is gorgeous. I think just the sound design in general is really, really, really good. I don't know if it sticks out compared to the rest of Dragon Ball Z, but it stuck out to me at how good it is. I don't know like where it stacks up compared to the rest of Dragon Ball Z though.
I think that's kind of Dragon Ball in general. It just has really, the music is super good in it, and a lot of the sound design is, all of the moves sound like they've got a good sound to when someone does land a hit, and like
it's satisfying.
Iconic, the noise.
It just felt like it needed to at least be just mentioned. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
Along with that is how gorgeous it is. Like, in terms of a visual standpoint, it's so like beautiful. The backdrops are always so vivid, and honestly, like, it is so iconic looking with its art style and art direction. And I just wanted to point that out also.
I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because Karl, I think you have like a good eye for like sort of visual storytelling and like aesthetics and themes and music and things like that, which to be honest, like, sometimes I overlook that. But that plays such a big role, like, all throughout Dragon Ball, as what made it such a big cultural phenomenon. Like, you can instantly tell by the art style that it's Dragon Ball, that Akira Toriyama made it. it has such a distinct art style, such a crisp and like yet also detailed. It's just it's a very like unique style. It's hard to describe, of course, but and then you have like you said, like the sound
like the point, the like that whole section when they're revealing Imperfect Cell for the first time, the sound design in that, where you really like hear just the shrieking of human beings and like the gunfires, and then like the static of the TV when it shuts down, and then everybody that's at the house, all like the Saiyans and all them are like just quiet because they're like, oh my god, what is this thing? And I feel like the audio of that just like brings it all together so crisply, and I think it does such a good job. And to be fair, in your point, I feel like audio direction is like generally best done whenever you really don't notice it, you know what I mean? And you more notice the story that it's helping show, and I think it does a good job at that.
Yeah, and I think that's a super the point where I remember it really hitting a little bit extra is when Vegeta does go to he goes to kick Cell with that like final hit, and when he goes to like make that final hit, he like when that little bit of an impact stops on his neck, you don't hear the noise that you heard like through every other hit, because most of the other big hits in Dragon Ball, it's like when like, you know, when you land a really good hit in Smash Bros. And it has that little bit of a like ching when it hits, you get that same emotion where you just get that like, ooh, that was good. And when that doesn't happen and you're like preparing for it because you're like, oh, this is going to be a huge kick from Vegeta, and it connects and you don't get that sound design that you know you're used to hearing, that's like an extra little bit of like your heart sinks for a second because you're like, oh wait, that was supposed to do something else.
You realize the power differential there.
Yeah, exactly.
You
yeah.
It gives you a feeling. So two things. So more broadly speaking, like this arc specifically, I think is like universally adored by fans of Dragon Ball Z as one of the best, and just they love the character of Gohan. And I think it should be mentioned, a lot of people are disappointed with, and me too, with kind of how they used Gohan as a character later on. Like, he didn't really become the main character as much. He kind of fell off. He became this... He wasn't as strong. He didn't have the same drive. He kind of got turned into like a normal civilian, which is an interesting progression, but I don't think the one a lot of people wanted. But
yeah.
But again, I guess that's just like Akira Toriyama subverting expectations again in another way. It's just not a way that people, I guess, liked as much.
And since you're listening right now, you know, we're not coming at you or your storytelling necessarily.
No, we love you, man. Just
thanks.
Why'd you screw up Gohan so much, though? Come on, man. I think that's what every like fan or like even casual fan of Dragon Ball feels like to some extent. But I will say that I have seen, of all the stuff Dragon Ball, like everywhere, we talk about all the games, merchandise, videos. There's entire channels that just talk about like what the writers came up with and how and all that. The one saga that I think sticks out is the Cell Saga, and like Dragon Ball Z Abridged. A lot of people might have heard of that. Highly recommend that, by the way. Super funny, well edited.
So good.
It's like the voice actors are almost better than the original. In some ways they are, actually. Like, they bring a new depth of character in a way. But that one, like, each episode of the Cell Saga from Dragon Ball Z Abridged has like over 10 million views.
And we should explain like what it is, because I feel like
true.
I don't know, like, do you have like a good elevator pitch for what it might be? Cause, like,
sure.
It's
I could describe it. So Dragon Ball Z Abridged is like, it is the comedic edits of Dragon Ball Z revoiced. The story is basically the same, but the episodes are all condensed. They're told, it's on YouTube. You can look it up. It's by Team 4-Star, who, oh my god, those guys are super talented. And they're just like super fans of Dragon Ball Z, who started this over 10 years ago, from the first episode of Dragon Ball Z up until the end of the Cell Saga. I think they're going to continue later, but I'm not totally sure. And they basically just edit every episode, and they condense many episodes and combine them into one episode. They have original voice acting, even I think original sound effects sometimes, their own little side plots and edits that they have. It turns out being like an alternate, basically, story of Dragon Ball Z that happens to be very funny. One of my favorite things about it is how they present the character Mr. Satan so well. Because in the show, he's like I mentioned, he's like has no explanation for these beam blasts and these super high, fast-paced fights. And then in they really play that up in Abridged to the point where he's like, oh, those are just lasers. Those are just smoke and mirrors, Jimmy. Like, those are just whatever. Like, he's talking to this reporter guy who's there. And then at one point, Cell literally splits up into like 4 different versions of himself as he's fighting Goku. And then they're just like, their jaws are dropped. And then he's just like, the reporter, Jimmy, is like, Mr. Satan, do you have an explanation for how Cell is doing this right now? And Mr. Satan's just like, they wrote this so well. He's just like, ever heard of mirrors, Jimmy? And then he's like, yes. And then he's like, well, that explains that. So it's such a good like fan made show. And then
so good.
On top of that,
oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just really quick, I was gonna say another guys. Just shout out to them. I love Mega 64. They do like live action skits of video games and stuff. They did a Cell saga in 8 minutes with all live action practical effects. It's also like super goofy and well made. It's super
so funny.
Yeah.
And also I think it's, I don't want to be wrong on this, but I think it's their 15-year anniversary as a channel.
Something like that, yeah.
It's pretty nuts. So
I've been following them too since like, oh man, dude, I love Mega. I have like all their apparel and stuff. I don't want to get into it. Yeah, that's literally a poster. I know the listeners can't see this, but you guys can see there's like a poster right there. That's actually one of their posters.
That's fantastic.
He's lying. He's lying just for all.
I just made it up, guys. I just drew it. It's like a picture I drew.
It's the words Mega 64 written on a Sharpie on the wall.
I'm that dedicated.
But like, I think this is a good like little segue to get into the cultural impact that Dragon Ball Z and specifically the Cell saga had on, American culture, because typically, for this podcast, at least what we had in mind when we like made it was we kind of wanted to do more like North American styled animation. But Dragon Ball Z felt like a good exception for that because of its impact in America and like just its role that it's played in American culture and like animation as a whole. So like if we want to like get into like how it has played an impact, because in my opinion, it might be, I'd argue that it's probably the most influential anime of all time, at least in American culture. I'd argue that. I don't know if anybody. I don't know.
No, I totally agree with you on that. And when you guys like first approached me, like you guys were more so thinking about American cartoons, and I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I grew up loving certain American cartoons, like Dexter's Lab, Ed, Edd and Eddy, even like Samurai Jack is one I really like too.
We hate Samurai Jack here.
Oh,
no, we
really?
don't. It's my favorite.
I'm just kidding.
It's like my favorite animated show of all time, and Carl just rips on it.
I love it, but I like to rip on it just to piss off John. Dude. Go on, I'm sorry. You go.
Samurai Jack is it's so good.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyways,
thank you.
Hell yeah, dude. No, but like, and there's plenty. Like, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of great American cartoons, but for me as a kid, like, and I feel this like cultural shift that happened almost to anyone in my generation and even like modern day in a lot of ways. When Dragon Ball Z first like really reached American audiences, in a way it was like unlike anything else we had ever seen in a cartoon form, of just super high intensity action, super not complicated storylines, but like kind of long storylines. So there was a lot to get invested into. Like the cast of characters almost felt like, this is going to sound so corny, but I swear they felt like a second like family almost once you watched enough episodes. You felt very like familiar with them. And then I think there's something kind of to be said about, you saw these huge massive scale battles, intergalactic, interplanetary, whatever, aliens, and yet none of it was done with like weapons or, you know, giant Gundam mech suits or spaceships. It was like, no, these are just people basically with blasts coming out of their hands with the ability
really hard to get there.
Yes, they trained hard. And it's like, it kind of makes you, I see like in the gym a lot and like in gym culture, quote unquote, people are always like, train like Goku. Like they have a shirt like that or like you know, Dragon Ball Z shirt. And it's like, of course that makes sense. It goes hand in hand. It's like people feel as though they can be strong just like these Saiyans. And in some ways you can. I mean, obviously you don't have laser beams shooting out your hands, but it is a cool thing. It's a cool thing to aspire to for a lot of kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I think its original impact on American culture might be because like it was our first intake of anime, and although like I feel like it did a good job at having an overarching plot that you probably won't understand if you just jumped into the middle, but would still be able to enjoy an episode if you jumped into the middle. And also, you can be there just for its beautiful action scenes, its beautiful art style, its great music, or you could be there because you really do enjoy like these characters, the character dynamics that are happening, and like just again like that family that you've like grown up with now, because like American cartoons don't really have overarching plots as much. Even to this day, they just don't really as much as it's seen in anime. I feel like anime is way more story oriented.
There's a select couple that get there, but
I mean, like,
even then,
Adventure Time seasons 5 and up, and then like Steven Universe. But like, I feel it's so obviously like there's like a distinct difference between how anime does its storytelling and then how like North American animation does its storytelling. And I think, I mean, obviously I wasn't there from the beginning, but I'd argue that a lot of the success that Dragon Ball Z had was its approachability, and then this brand new like form of storytelling that we've never seen in animation before.
I think no, you're totally correct. I was just gonna say, I think a big thing that I kind of clued into after thinking about this for a little bit was that Dragon Ball Z can be referenced in other shows as easily as something like Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like totally normal. And I just kind of clued in on that at some point after we recorded the, rest in peace last episode. It was like we had mentioned something along those lines. And I was just thinking about how like Kids Next Door has like a scene where one of the kids like goes Super Saiyan and they totally like do the fake mimic of like shooting a Kamehameha beam. And that like fit in that show. And I got the same reaction to that I would if I'm sure they did. I can't think of the exact scene, but I'm sure there's like a Star Wars reference or something in that show.
Yeah.
Where it's like those things add up, and that's not something you see from most shows other than Dragon Ball, where it just has that cultural impact of like someone saying Kamehameha, or if in any adult animated show where they're like someone's watching anime and you see a jacked dude screaming on the screen, you understand that they're like making a joke about Dragon Ball, but it's because it's so instantly recognizable of the very base things that make the show what it is, that isn't even the like deeper what actually like makes it really great, but it's just so recognizable and
it's reverberated across. I mean, I think to Carl's like original point, this was an anime that bridged the gap, I think, for a lot of Western audiences of like, hey, Japan has cartoons too. They do things a little differently. Here's a taste of it. And then it just blew up. Like, I think obviously Dragon Ball Z wasn't the only one to do this, but I would argue it was a key player in it, a very key player in nowadays, like American audiences, Western audiences in general. Anime is like a normal part of people's entertainment these days. It's like very like Crunchyroll, even Netflix has a lot of anime. People, it's very normalized. Yeah. And as John is saying, like throughout so many shows and things, Dragon Ball Z is almost as ubiquitous as something like a Star Wars, like a Lord of the Rings, like a Matrix, like just completely key shows and movies and pieces of literature that have totally stood the test of time. And like to anyone listening who maybe hasn't seen it or like has the stigma about it, and might not be for everyone, but I would say you owe it to yourself to definitely check it out, because I mean there's a reason that like everywhere you look, people to this day are just obsessed with it. They talk about it all the time, make videos about it, t-shirts, merchandise, video games, everything, you name it. It's, if not, you could either start from the Cell Saga, like from the episode where Trunks appears, or I think it's best to start from at least the start of Dragon Ball Z, possibly even Dragon Ball, because the payoff, the character development does become more and more worth it as you do that. But it's not totally necessary either if you're only interested in like seeing the Cell Saga, for example.
Yeah, to get into that conversation, I, again, have only watched the Cell Saga, but to be transparent, you can watch it like I did and enjoy it thoroughly. But I can see the character dynamics and the character growth that I didn't get to experience myself. And now, like, I'm going to go back and watch the rest of it, you know what I mean? And then watch this and see how much better it is. And it will be better. Like, that's just all there is to it. It's like, there's been so much building to this segment, and then the Cell Saga has such a build that it would be worthwhile to watch the entirety of it, I'd argue.
Right.
Yeah, I'm in the same place where it is, if you really want to feel the full hit of it, it's definitely worth it to go back from the start and watch through to it, which it's a lot to get through to the Cell Saga. Like, this Cell Saga starts at like episode 140 of the original Dragon Ball Z,
A lot of episodes,
which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's definitely worth it to get there, and you see so many other cool things going to it. Like, obviously we're not talking about them because this episode isn't, you know, about the Frieza saga or the Android saga or the Saiyans or any of that happens beforehand, but all of that is still really good and still deserves, like, a bunch of the things that we said we really love about the Cell Saga are still in those other ones, even though they might not be as, like, excellently done. They're still well done, and it's worth it to go back and watch those, but it's not gonna... You're not gonna walk into this and be completely confused, other than maybe picking up character names if you're going into this totally blind. But even then, Dragon Ball's so ubiquitous that...
And if you really want to save time, you refer back to what I said earlier, you theoretically could watch the abridged, and, like, obviously you're going to be missing, like, certain things, but you'll have a general idea if you want to just like do it quickly, I guess. So
yeah, there's got to be someone out there who's done videos to catch you up to certain points, or
100%.
at least
I'm sure
basically
there's been
explain
70 different people, you know?
I feel like even this podcast will, like, catch you up like 50% of, like, what you need to know in a way, like, because we've talked so much about the characters and, like, how they are personally and all that, but I mean, but at the same time, the beauty of it is that we could talk for another 5 hours about each single scene from the whole saga, because we just skipped over entire plot points for the sake of...
There's so many... there's literal plot points that we just didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Like, that's just... we
intentionally,
And that's why I knew, like, when Glink said he wanted to talk about Dragon Ball Z, I was like, a specific saga, because this is already, like, I'm looking at the time, this is probably going to end up being our longest episode so far, and it was about one saga.
We're talking, like, 2 seasons of a 9-season show that also has a prequel show that's, like, 5 seasons and multiple other series afterwards and movies and all of that ties into it. Which is why we couldn't really just be like Dragon Ball overall.
Right.
So the Cell Saga is a perfect example of it, and I think you made a great point. After listening to this, if anything we said interested you, or if there was any points, like, maybe it's just because I've already seen it and I know exactly what we're talking about, but there were points when Glink was, like, talking about certain scenes that happened that I was, like, re-getting goosebumps. If you got the slightest bit of that from hearing us talk about it, you gotta watch the show, because the way that they put it all together... Yeah, exactly. We're just... 3 random dudes on the internet being like, we really like the strong men, but it's real great to actually watch the strong men. Like,
they're such hunks too.
They're they're so good. Yeah.
If anything, you get to see these beautiful, beautiful men.
Yeah, if nothing else.
All right. Do you wanna just get to the end game?
Sure. So
where can we find you, Glinkster?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you guys once again for, like, having me. I know some of the listeners might not know, but, like, there's a bit of a technical goof up, and it was really on my end, to be totally frank with you guys. And I mean, these guys are awesome. You guys have been very patient, and I think you guys each of you have unique perspectives on this, which is really cool to hear too. Because John, like, you're kind of more familiar with it, and you know, you've seen it, like, the whole thing through. And then Karl, like, you kind of went into this with fresh eyes, a fresh perspective, and I actually think that's unique. Like, if we were all just super nerds about it, we'd be, like, kind of talking past an audience who, like, I don't know what power level are they talking about? You know, like, they wouldn't even understand us. So I think it's certain, like, this is actually a great, like, subset of people to discuss this. And yeah, if anyone's interested, like you can find me on YouTube. Like I said, I make videos pretty like sometimes analytical video essays. Sometimes like I'll just interview people for comedy videos or something, or everything in between. Yeah, Twitter on Glink Live, and that's where you can find me.
I just want to really quick go over that because we can't let that just happen. Glink, I've been watching Glink for like 2 years now, and he was one of those that I went to Johnny and was like, this would be a stretch, but let's just send out an invite and like see what happens. And he actually got back to us, and it was pretty wild. And it's really cool to be able to work with him because again, like he's probably one of my favorite YouTubers and has been consistently for 2 years now. Like he hits home run after home run. He does like a lot of video like editorials almost, and then also does funny bits. Like for instance, he went to adult film stars convention and preached the word of nofap, and it was just it's fantastic. So make sure you guys check out at least a few of his videos.
Thanks.
And if you could recommend a place for people to start with your content, like is there like a specific video that you're proud of or think that is a good introduction to your general stylings?
I tend to sometimes have this style where I focus nostalgically on things. I don't know. Maybe I'm like stuck in the past in some regard, but one of my favorite videos that I made was one called "Why 2007 Was the Best Year Ever," and it's like such a weird concept, but it's basically just me being super nostalgic for that era of like growing up and just experiencing the internet, and I think that's one that people would enjoy and kind of gives a good idea of sort of what I do a bit. So yeah, that'd be a cool place to start.
I would have said that, or your Bully Hunters videos.
Oh god,
really well made.
Yeah, that was fun to make too.
So it's Glink Live on Twitter and just Glink
on YouTube.
Yeah. So that's where you could find him. You could find me at @KarlJacobs_ on Twitter and Instagram, but I don't really do anything on Instagram. It is Karl with a K. Where can we find you, Johnny?
I am at Johnny Hayes on everything, JohhnnyHaze. I make art. I talk about Muppets, probably. Very fond of the Muppets here at Toon Overload. We love them a lot.
I want to point out...
Pepe the King Prawn, please come on our show.
I want to point out Johnny does all the art for this show, so if you guys are like ever... you think it's cool or something like that, he does commissions, so like give him money to make you art or whatever.
Thank you.
Because it's cool. I know it'd probably be awkward for him to say it, so I'm just going to force that into every episode.
I can vouch for that, by the way, because I've seen a small taste of John's work. Like the thumbnail for this podcast just encapsulates everything perfectly. I just got to say that.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome. And then you can find our Twitter of this show at Toon Overload. It's TOONOVERLOAD or Toon Overload Show on Instagram. I think that wraps it up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks again, guys.
If you have any ideas or any guests that you want us to talk about, cartoonoverloadshow@gmail.com. But that's pretty much it then.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate it, Glink. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much once again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. We still don't have a sign-off. Karl, what's our fun thing for this week?
Oh, God.
Thanks, dude.
Right. Bye.
That sounded like Cell just absorbing somebody right there.
Yeah, it did. I was going to say that, too.